on Jaguar Gator 8, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about a dumb decision made during the Eastern Illinois-Northern Illinois game on Thursday, and some of the worst clock management you're ever going to see. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1987 NFL strike was one of the most chaotic moments in the history of the NFL. It would be one thing if the season just came to a screeching halt like it did in 1982, and nothing was happening. However, the owners decided that they could not afford to lose any games. With or without the actual players, they were going to play the games, even if the quality was significantly worse, and even if it forced coaches to manage two completely separate teams playing under the same logo and brand identity and name. The strike led to players who were working regular 9-to-5 jobs, just like a lot of people watching this video, getting a chance for 1 month to play in the NFL, live out their childhood dream, and in some cases, like with Saints quarterback John Fourcade, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, even impress enough to the point where you can stay on the roster and build a pretty long NFL career. However, when you're signing so many players at once, having to fill out an entire squad of new people, a lot of times, background checks kind of go out the door. You're just concerned about fielding a team, and when you have no time at all to get them ready and to sign free agents and prevent them from going to other teams, you don't have time to get the 411 on everyone like you might be able to during the draft or if you were signing them as a regular free agent. It's almost like how it's way more likely they are going to make a typo if you have an hour to write a 10-page memo versus having an hour to write a 1-paragraph memo. You don't have the time to check it. You just have to get it done. And that means that sometimes certain things can slip through the cracks. Now, there are levels to these slippages through the cracks. There's mundane things in the grand scheme of things, like the guy's knee is a bit more banged up than you thought, or you were under the assumption that the running back you signed was 220 pounds, and in reality, he's now up to 240 pounds since he didn't have a chance to stay in football shape, and since he thought before the strike that his career was done. And then, there's something like, I don't know, one of your players may or may not be a murderer and might be on trial as things stand. That seems like a pretty big deal, and that seems like a bit of an oversight. Well, in 1987, the Miami Dolphins signed a guy like that. Meet this guy right here, former Texas A&M tight end Rich Siler. In 1987, he got his chance to play in the NFL, and he did it under the most unusual of circumstances, to the point where 35 years later, it's not only hard to believe that this even happened, but that Don Shula was rather nonchalant about it afterwards. Because this is the story behind the time that the Miami Dolphins signed a murderer. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand Rich Siler, the football player, and how good he was. And before we begin, I have to apologize in advance for the clips. No, there is nothing wrong with your computer or anything like that. The number of clips available, considering how scarce college football footage is from the mid-1980s, is insanely slim. And if you've been on this channel long enough, you know that I hate repeating clips, because I think it's super lazy and you get nothing out of it. So just keep that in mind. This was literally all the footage I could find of this guy, even if I had to do just a tiny bit of manipulating with the speed. Having said that, after beginning his career at Illinois before transferring, Siler found himself as a big part of the Texas A&M Aggies offense in 1983, as not only was he one of the top options on that side of the ball for Texas A&M, but he was one of the top options in the entire Southwest Conference. During that 1983 season, he had 40 receptions for 465 yards and 4 touchdowns. All 3 of those totals led the team, and were near the top of the Southwest Conference. He ranked 4th in receptions and receiving touchdowns, and 6th in receiving yards. This made him arguably the top tight end in the conference, which is not a bad way to start off your career at a brand new school. Having said that, after a great 1983 season, where he was receiving a ton of attention for being a great security blanket, and for never going down on first contact, simply bulldozing his way through defenders, injuries got the best of him. He's one of those what-if situations, because if he stayed healthy, many people think, and understandably so when watching him play, that he could have been one of the best receiving tight ends in all of college football, and could have been drafted. But a foot injury in 1984 and a lackluster 1985 season where he couldn't win his starting job back derailed what was looking like an incredibly promising career, as over those 2 seasons, he had just 8 catches for 62 yards and no touchdowns. I don't think anyone thought after his 1983 season, where he put himself on the map, that he was never going to find the end zone again. But unfortunately, that's what happened. And when the 1986 NFL Draft rolled around, not only did Siler not get chosen, but he got very few offers as an undrafted free agent, outside of an incredibly brief stint lasting a few days with the St. Louis Cardinals. Those final 2 seasons derailed any chance at a professional career. He was out of football in 1986, and was out of football to start off the 1987 season. It seemed like Siler was never going to suit up and play again. At least, not on a professional level. But that was before the strike happened. And remember, the strike and the tight deadline that happened because of it, with signing players quickly to get them into game shape, made teams really desperate. Don't believe me? The Detroit Lions tried signing a player who was medically unable to play, and got knocked unconscious for 15 minutes before medically retiring the year before. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And with that, Don Shula saw enough out of Siler, and saw enough potential there that he decided to bring him onto the team as one of the replacement players. Never mind the fact that he hadn't scored a touchdown since 1983, and never mind the fact that he had never played a down in professional football, from the NFL to the USFL to the CFL. The Dolphins were bringing him on in the hopes that maybe he could bring back his form from 1983. Siler and the rest of the replacement players were getting ready to fly across the country to the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seattle Seahawks in the first straight game of the season. And before the trip, Siler met with head coach Don Shula and felt the need to tell him something private and personal. Now I'm sure Shula was thinking a lot about what Siler was going to say. Maybe he was going to thank him for the opportunity to continue his football career and for believing in him when no one else would. Maybe he was going to ask him a question about the game plan, or assure him that he was going to be the best thing to happen to this team. But I guarantee you, whatever Don Shula was thinking, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what Rich Siler was about to say. Because as it turns out, Rich Siler had a confession to make. And that confession was that he was about to be on trial for second-degree murder. Yep, you heard that right. The Dolphins signed a player that may or may not have been a murderer. Here's what happened, according to the facts of the case. On New Year's Eve in 1986, Siler was running around with a group of friends, including his brother, Clarence. Somehow, on this journey of theirs, they encountered a drug dealer. Whether the drug dealer was just looking for trouble, or whether they approached the drug dealer and were trying to get some drugs themselves, it is unclear. However, during this altercation, they were able to wrestle a pistol off of the drug dealer. They kept the pistol, and they had the absolutely genius idea to not only drive around with it, but scare some teenagers who were minding their own business. Multiple sources indicated that this was done as a prank, and during this prank, the gun came out. However, the gun was jammed. Clarence handed the weapon to Rich, who then, because this story lacks common sense and breaks every gun safety rule in the book, decided to free the jammed weapon by aiming at one of the teenagers, a 17-year-old girl named Terry Harry, even though the weapon was loaded. And I'm sure you can guess what happens next. The gun went off, Harry was struck in the forehead, and was pronounced brain dead. Siler was going to go on trial in December for this, and at the time of the strike, was out on a $7,500 bond, although Siler had permission from the judge to leave the state for work-related reasons and travel with the team. You can imagine that the Dolphins were taken aback by this when Siler came to them and said, "Oh yeah, by the way guys, I murdered someone, and I might be going to jail in a few weeks for a very long time." After Siler revealed the news to the team, he said that he totally understood if the team decided to release him and not have him be a member of the team anymore. How thoughtful of him. As Siler said, "I told them I'd do anything I could to protect their reputation so it wouldn't be blemished. I don't know what's going to happen. If they release me because of it, I have no hard feelings. They dealt me a fair hand. Keep in mind that the way Siler even got on the team, considering he had done nothing, was deceptive in itself. He bombarded Charlie Winter, the pro personnel director, with phone call after phone call, before saying that he was Agent Steinberg, using identity theft to get his way. Completely unrelated, but in 2014, Siler was sentenced to 13 years in prison for, you guessed it, identity theft. Can't say the warning signs weren't there. Winter, somehow, was amused by this, and admired his persistence, and decided to sign him. That already should have been a giant red flag. And now there's the fact that, oh yeah, he murdered a teenage girl! Shula was taken back, said that he had no idea what he was going to do, and said, "We're just trying to find out what happened. There's just so many new things going on here. We're just learning the people." So you would think that after all of that, the Dolphins would cut ties with him, because it was awful PR at a time where the PR of the league was at an all-time low. I'm not defending Deshaun Watson by any means. What he did was despicable. However, you can understand how a team would want to protect their franchise quarterback that they gave up a ton of draft capital for, and that can have a significant impact in winning games. I don't agree with it at all, but you can understand how that could happen. This is a third-string tight end who murdered a teenage girl, had never played it down in the NFL or in any professional football league, and had to use deceptive tactics just to even get onto the roster. This isn't a guy you go to bat for. You cut your losses and you move on. Except for Don Shula. Because not only did Shula decide to keep Siler on the roster, but Shula said that they couldn't cut him, because he's on all the special teams plays. You heard that right. Don Shula decided to keep a murderer on the team because he may be decent at special teams. This blew up in his face when Siler broke his right ankle while blocking on a kickoff, and was unable to play for the rest of the strike games. But the Dolphins kept him on the roster until February of 1988, even after the strike ended. They kept him on even though when the trial ended, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail for his actions in the death of the teenage girl. I get not necessarily being able to conduct background checks on everyone, but when you combine literally everything here, how the heck did this guy stay on a roster for a few months? How was he not immediately cut after admitting to literally murdering someone? It's baffling. Just baffling. No player is worth protecting to this level, let alone a backup tight end who's not even going to play again once the strike is over, and who needs the permission of the judge just to even travel, and who took away a human life. The Dolphins have signed thousands upon thousands of players in the over half-century-long history of the franchise. But seriously, try topping this. Try topping a guy that impersonated someone just to get the chance to come in. As it turns out, the guy was a murderer who was out on bond and was currently awaiting trial. When Bill Belichick found out that Aaron Hernandez was a murderer, even though he was an insanely talented tight end, he was cut immediately. When Don Shula found out that his backup tight end with no career stats was a murderer, he kept his job. You would think that murder would be enough of a disqualification for playing in the NFL again, even for franchise quarterbacks, let alone third-string tight ends. But nope, because back in 1987, because teams were so desperate during the strike, if you had a pulse, even if your victim didn't, you got to play and keep your job. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.